进华院去，但是没有一个人敢开口。
Secrets they help me keep. They're destroying me.
你想我有没有伤害查理？
我也不会是第一次了。我想我们两个都是学习不起。
我可没有不见得光的东西。
这家里的人没有一个是无辜的。
Charlie had something to hide, and you have something to hide. But you know what? It will come out.
Don't you ever tell me what I have to do.
You know, people who do this sort of thing, they don't stop. They can't. Not until they die, or somebody else does.
Well, probably should be.
My name is Paul Crow. I'm a professor in the Department of Humanities at SFU, and I also teach for our Asia-Canada program. And for 7 years, up until recently, I had the honor of directing the David C. Chai Lam Center for International Communication, which does a tremendous amount of community outreach work, as well as the more standard academic work. And part of the work during the early time that I was directing involved a partnership with Ian Wong and CinevolutionMedia Arts Society. And together we came up with this notion of having a documentary screening to engage the public in important issues, social issues, political issues, and so on. And so the relationship's grown over the years, and it's because of that relationship in part that we have this event today. I'd like to introduce Yin-Jo Chang to have her come up and say a few words. She's actually VP of CinevolutionMedia Arts, and maybe, where are you, Yin-Jo? Oh, you're right here.
I've been working with Cinevolution since, I guess, 2012, when I was in the process of graduating from UBC and looking for a way to get more involved in the arts community in Richmond. And I came across Cinevolution, which is this film and media arts organization interested in exploring questions of migration, of diasporic identities, of talking about, you know, things that are happening in the current moment, and the way it affects our identity through film and media arts. So I was immediately attracted to this mandate. So Ying and I met, we worked together, and the Media Cafe actually came out of some of those early meetings between her and I, where we thought that what Richmond needed at the time, and I think continues to need, is a space where you know, filmmakers, artists, film lovers, art lovers, and just people who are interested in the social fabric of our community can come together and talk about relevant social issues through film and through media art. And Blood and Water, I would say, certainly does touch on a number of those themes. It's an important cultural and social moment. So we're really excited to be presenting that here today and to having this conversation with you all. So thank you so much for coming.
And I'd like to introduce Ethan Ben-Hu, the producer of the show, to come up and say a few words about this work.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here, us being BC, Alfina, Owen and Fiona, as well as me here. There were a lot of film projects and TV projects that have done Asian stories, but what's unique about this show is that this is the first show using Cantonese, Mandarin, English as the performing languages in a native way, in a setting that is truly reflective of the demographic reality in Canada, or at least in big cities like Vancouver and Toronto. So that, I think, is a first not only in Canada, I think in North America, almost anywhere out of Greater China area, you see shows doing this, and there were even discussions that why Anna can speak both Mandarin and Cantonese, and you know that, and we basically are able to justify that a lot of Canadian-born Chinese Canadians who hang out at school, obviously English is not a problem, and then they hang with a lot of the so-called first or second waves of Hong Kong immigrants who predominantly are Cantonese speakers, and then you're going to hang with the cool kids. You learn the language of the group, which in the 90s and early 2000s, all Cantonese was the raging sort of language. now is all Mandarin. So so we kind of, every character can be justified in the context of the Chinese Canadian community, right? And why in season 2, which is now in post-production, it looks amazing, even just a rough cut. So even myself got blown away by not just the cinematography, the performance as well. And we were lucky to bring in some heavyweight like BC, and you don't owe me anything, just dinner will do. That to perform that kind of to bring that kind of intensity to a role that he's really comfortable with, in terms of he knows what we're talking about. He knows the nuances of the character, right? So I'm going to bring him in, even that he's not in season 1, but he can tell you his experience in a production like this. I mean, this talk is not just about blood and water, right? This talk is about something kind of bigger than this, but we just use this as a floor opener.
Heavy. I think it's because of the scene. The atmosphere in this room is kind of heavy too. Lighten up. Well, just thank you very much, the band, because at least I don't need to explain to you that I was not cut out of season 1. My character came in on season 2, well, talking about the language, one thing good about this experience is that it's not only about the Chinese language as a whole. Usually in the past, anyone who speaks non-English will be considered okay with Chinese, and they think it's okay. The director, the producer said okay. Now everyone speaks authentic Cantonese, authentic Mandarin, but one thing very important is that not every character can speak perfect Mandarin. Not everyone can speak perfect Cantonese. So some of the Cantonese are Taiwanese, some of the Cantonese are English. If you speak to a lot of people who are born here, they speak Cantonese, but their Cantonese is kind of very interesting. And so all these interesting things that in the happens in real life reflects in the movie. That's why in that movie we are not just a token Chinese. It's the real people who live there. In any family, like in the movie, in the show, there are Cantonese and Mandarin dialogues. And in real life, we can have a fight in the restaurant because we don't understand each other. Can you believe it? There's a lot of non-Chinese, they cannot believe that we don't understand each other, and we have to take a paper out and write the language, because the only thing similar about the Chinese language is the written language, and the sound is totally different. So those are the things that reflects the reality, and that's what I found interesting. And about the boundary, because when I look at it as breaking the boundary, I do have my personal, very strong viewpoint of it, is that I don't break boundaries in my life, never, because they don't exist for me. It doesn't exist in my world. I just walk around. You don't like it? Too bad. So I think what today is that we finally, our existence without breaking anything has been acknowledged. And that acknowledgement comes from people who have been walking around, crossing borders like a ghost, in and out. But they have performed, they have earned the respect. And that's why today we actors and actresses have the chance to perform in such a good show, because there are people who have worked very hard to break those boundaries. And I think that really, I have to say, I finished all the role. I got my paycheck already, so I don't need to kiss you. But I really want to say is that Ben and his team has worked really, really hard to convince the others to do the way that he believed should be. And I think that is something that we all need to give him a big round of applause.
And I want to thank you for giving me the privilege to engage you and to talk about such an amazing production. It gives me a real pleasure both as a cultural studies scholar and a super fan of Prime TV. So, as both a critic and a fan, I love it. Maybe I know people are probably brimming with questions, so maybe I'll just raise 3 issues that really struck me as very interesting about the show, and maybe we can kind of have a dialogue around it. The first is for sure you've been mentioning already around linguistic diversity. I think it's really pushing the discussion around diversity has been so loud lately around Hollywood, the Oscars so white critique, right? But I think what you're doing is way beyond that. It's not just talking about diverse ethnic representation. It's actually talking about representing a linguistic diversity, and that I haven't seen in Hollywood. So I'm kind of wondering whether maybe it's easier to do it in Canada because we're already a bilingual country. We're kind of used to multiculturalism. I actually can't imagine this show being in the U.S. And maybe it will be distributed there. So, but I also love the fact that not only do you have linguistic diversity in the show that reflects class differences, character differences, you also dramatize scenes of translation. There was one scene in episode 3 when Detective Gorski, I think, interviewed Fiona's character, and it was all, the translations all dramatized for us. And when Lieutenant Chu, who cannot understand Chinese, you need Zhou's translation in that scene with Mr. Xie. I think that's amazing. That is really a kind of reality that we never see on screen. So that's the first thing I would even like to hear a bit more around dramatizing all of that kind of linguistic communication and miscommunication. The second issue that I want to raise, I think you're very daring with tackling the theme of sexual abuse. I won't give too much away. This is kind of a spoiler, I'm sorry. But there is the theme, very intense theme around sexual abuse within Asian family, which I think is never, almost hardly ever talked about. And not only do you dramatize that, you go beyond, and there's like a whole scene around rehabilitation, which I think is very daring, like that around that, I won't say which character, but that character is not even demonized in a way that they're usually demonized on Law and Order, etc. And you actually make that character quite ambivalent. Could he have been rehabilitated? Like, what's going on? How do the parents treat this? So I think that theme is really daring, and I'm very impressed. The gender issue is very, well done. You see, like, how the gender politics within the police department, also how Mr. Xie treats Detective Bradley, as in contrast to how he treats Lieutenant Chu. So I think the gender politics is just really progressive. So yeah, I'm kind of also interested in hearing around, dealing with gender sexuality issue, especially within kind of Asian context, is really interesting. The last point I'll raise is, Alfina already alluded to it, that we're so used to seeing Vancouver on screen, but never as itself. It's Seattle, it's New York, it's Pyongyang even, but it's never itself. And when it plays itself, it's usually in independent artistic production. So for me, that's a real pleasure that we haven't seen Vancouver on a crime show since Da Vinci's Inquest, I think. But I think this goes further than Da Vinci Inspect. We're seeing multicultural Vancouver. And so I'm also curious whether in season 2, does Vancouver as a character play even more of a part? Like, do we see linguistic Vancouver? Do we see Richmond? Do we see, I know it's very expensive to film in Vancouver, so that might be a bit of a problem. But that for me is also a pleasure to kind of see multicultural Vancouver as a character as itself on screen.